Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive historical journey through one of the most influential collections of texts in human history, the Old Testament. We are going to trace a sweeping, epic narrative. We're talking divine promises, colossal human failures, and the relentless march of historical consequences. Let's get right into it. Now, our source text for this journey is the Nueva Biblia de las Americas, or the NBLA. And listen, we aren't just going to look at isolated verses here. We're taking a step back to analyze the sweeping historical arc. We really want to uncover the core themes that bind Genesis, Deuteronomy, Judges, and the books of Kings into a single, cohesive narrative about humanity and the divine. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Origins and patriarchal promises. 2. The law and the covenant. 3. The era of the judges. 4. The rise of the kings. And 5. Wisdom and the fall. Just to ground us in the sheer scale of the history we're covering, take a look at this timeline. We're stretching all the way from the absolute dawn of creation in Genesis, right through the nomadic wanderings detailed in Deuteronomy. From there, we take a pretty steep plunge into the utter chaos of the Judges, followed by an upward swing towards centralized power with Saul and David, and finally, we hit the peak, and honestly, the tragic fall during the reign of Solomon. Section 1. Origins and patriarchal promises, the beginning of everything. Okay, so to understand everything that comes later, we really have to start at the foundation. The narrative kicks off with absolute majesty and this incredibly declarative language. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Just think about that. This single sentence from Genesis chapter 1 establishes the ultimate premise for the entire text. Absolutely everything originates from and is completely subject to the Creator. From the vastness of the entire cosmos, the narrative suddenly zooms way in on just one family. In Genesis 13, God makes a monumental promise to Abram. He promises to make his descendants as uncountable as the dust of the earth. Literally, the dust of the earth. This specific patriarchal promise becomes the absolute bedrock of the Israelites' historical claim to the Promised Land. Section 2. The Law and the Covenant. Establishing the rules. So as those descendants multiply and start transitioning from nomadic tribes into an actual structured society, they desperately need a framework, right? So they're given a strict moral code, the 10 Commandments. And it's fascinating to notice how it's structured. It begins with absolute vertical loyalty, no other gods before me. And then it moves on to establish horizontal morality, things like preserving life, respecting property, and maintaining the truth. This essentially acts as the fundamental constitution of their covenant with God. And this brilliantly illustrates the core dynamic of that entire covenant. In Deuteronomy 30, Moses essentially lays it all out on the line for the people. He says, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil." You see, this is the ultimate, recurring theme of the Old Testament. It's all about choice and consequence. Obedience leads to blessing and life, but disobedience, especially turning to other gods, well, that leads to absolute ruin. Section 3. The era of the Judges, a time of chaos. Now, after those early leaders pass away, the nation enters a really dark period, and it's perfectly captured by this honestly chilling refrain you see over and over. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Remember that strict moral framework we just looked at? Yeah, here it completely collapses. It turns out, when everyone just decides their own morality, the result is a violent, terrifying chaos. Which naturally brings us to a really critical question. Why did Israel suddenly ask for a king? Well, when you look back at the utter devastation and the sheer moral bankruptcy of the Judges era, the demand for a centralized monarchy that we see in 1 Samuel makes total sense. It isn't just some political shift, it is a desperate cry for order. Section 4. The rise of the kings, from Saul to David. The prophet Samuel acts as the bridge into this new era, and he's the one who appoints the first kings. But getting a king did not give the people a free pass. Samuel explicitly warns them that setting up a monarchy doesn't just magically erase that law of consequence we talked about earlier. He tells them point blank, "But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king." So the human king is still entirely subject to the divine king. And we actually see this exact principle fully acknowledged by Israel's greatest king, David. Picture this. He's on his deathbed, passing the crown to his son Solomon. And David doesn't give him military strategies or economic advice. No, he gives him theological instructions. He says, "Keep the charge of the Lord your God according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed." He's making it crystal clear that physical and political success are tied directly back to the law. Section 5. Wisdom and the Fall, the Reign of Solomon. Now, Solomon is a fascinating figure. He represents both the absolute peak of Israel's golden age and the tragic beginning of its downfall. Just look at the devastating contrast here. The ideal mandate for a king, laid out way back in Deuteronomy, was to read the law daily and never turn aside. But despite his famously unprecedented wisdom, Solomon's later years show a completely different reality. He took foreign wives, his heart turned away after other gods, and he violated the very first commandment. The wisest king somehow managed to break the foundational covenant. And of course, that law of consequence we've been talking about, it kicks in almost immediately. Because of Solomon's disobedience, the kingdom rapidly fractures and literally tears into two separate nations. New leaders step up and establish outright idol worship. Subsequent kings like Baasha and Elah just continually provoke the Lord to anger. And ultimately, the entire population suffers catastrophic loss and exile. Why? Simply because they abandon the covenant. So, we've traversed all the way from the creation of the world right down to the fracturing of a nation. As you've seen, it's a clear, cyclical narrative. A covenant is made, the people fall into chaos, leaders are established to bring order, but eventually, even the greatest kings fall to corruption. And this whole journey leaves us with a pretty profound question. Given all this historical evidence that obedience brings life and disobedience brings ruin, which path will the next generation choose? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring and keep asking the big questions.